Testament reading is Exodus chapter 1, beginning with the 8th verse. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase and join our enemies and fight against us and escape." So they set the taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built cities, Pithom and Ramesses, for Pharaoh. The Egyptians became ruthless and made their lives bitter with hard service in water and brick and field labor. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. The king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So the people multiplied and became very strong. Now a man from the house of Levi married a Levite woman. She conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a boy, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sisters stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket amongst the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
When Alec Fleming was growing up in Scotland, both his parents had died by the time he was 10 years old, so they shuttled him off to London to live with some relative, and he began to work in a loading dock, just hauling boxes. His 18th birthday came in the year 1901. In those days, this is hard to imagine. People died from simple infections. So, like you might get an earache and you'd wind up deaf. Or women died in childbirth because there were no antibiotics. So in 1901, Alec Fleming had an uncle who died, left him some money. He decided to go to medical school. He went to medical school, did some research after that, and discovered penicillin. People had thought infections, that's just the way it would be, but yet Alec Fleming, off a loading dock in London, penniless, became the one who discovered antibiotics. In the 12th century in central Italy, there was constant warfare. People thought that's just the way it is. All of the different fiefdoms had been fighting for years. One of the warriors named Giovanni had a dream of being the greatest of all the knights, the greatest of all the military heroes, but he was injured in a battle and was convalescing in Perugia, and he had dreams then not of being a great knight, but he kept having dreams of Jesus speaking to him about peace. We know him as St. Francis of Assisi, and he brought peace to that place where peace had been unimaginable. In India, in the first half of the 20th century, the poverty was terrible, the cruelty was immense. As Indians lived under the thumb of the British Empire, they looked around, was there any hope? They did not find it within India itself. Instead, there was a young man, a young lawyer named Mohandas, who lived in South Africa, of all places. He was a troublemaker. He kept getting thrown off buses. He kept getting beaten by the police, but finally he came back to India. We know him as Mahatma Gandhi, and he led the people of India to independence. There was still great poverty in India. There was a young woman about that time who lived in Albania. Her name was Agnes. And she had dreams of India, God saying to her, go to India. So she went to India and she was teaching affluent Bengali girls. But then one night in the year 1946, she was on a train headed to Darjeeling and she heard Jesus speak to her again. And Jesus said, I want you to touch the poorest of the poor. We know Agnes as Mother Teresa of Calcutta. The need being solved by someone coming from Albania. We see so much racial tension in our country today. There's been a long history of that, and it's taken different forms. During Depression America in the 1930s, the Depression was bad for everybody. It was especially severe for African Americans who lived in the South, because back then, not only was the economy in total shambles, but if you were black, you could get lynched. The KKK was rampaging through the Southeast, burning buildings and crosses and such. There was a little boy who was playing on Auburn Avenue during the 1930s. He went to Sunday school. He tried to be the best Sunday school student that he possibly could be. He heard a call to ministry. His name was Little Mike. His dad was Big Mike. Little Mike went off to seminary and came back, became a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. We know him as Martin Luther King Jr. He touched off the civil rights movement. Nobody saw it coming. When King was a little boy on Auburn Avenue, there was another girl named Rosa McCauley. She lived in Tuskegee, Alabama. She decided to go to college. There was a little college near there that was provided for black girls, except she went for about a month, and then the KKK came and burned the building down. Well, there's nothing else for her to do, so she moved to Montgomery to live with a relative. She became a seamstress. She went to her Methodist church there. For 20 years, when she got on a bus, she did what she was told to do, which was to yield her seat to any white person who got on. But after 20 years, on December the 1st, 1955, she said, no longer, I'm going to keep my seat. They interviewed her later and said, oh, where'd you learn that? She said, I learned that from reading the Bible in my Methodist Sunday school class. In San Francisco in 1906, there was an earthquake. There was a little girl named Dorothy who was 8 years old who was nearly killed. She looked around after the earthquake and she noticed how much people loved each other, how everyone was pitching in to help each other, and she'd never noticed that before in her life. So as a little girl, she began to wonder, why can't we do this all the time? So as she grew up, she noticed things like we didn't have child labor laws. Little kids were put to work in sweatshops. She thought, that's not right. That's not how you love a child. They ought to be able to be in school. She looked at her Catholic church that cared nothing about what went on outside the walls. And she said, that is not right. So she started a vigorous protest movement. She published a newspaper out of her own apartment. She started a food service out of her own apartment to feed the hungry in the city of New York. We know her as Dorothy Day, maybe the great Catholic saint of the past century. Nobody saw that coming from a little girl nearly dead in the rubble of the San Francisco earthquake. Last century, there were many sick children in sub-Saharan Africa, of course, with no medical care whatsoever. Many were in a country called Lamparine. They looked around, who could come and help us? Well, it turned out there was a world-class organist in those days. He was almost as good as Jimmy Jones. And he was traveling, and he was world famous. He was a scholar of Johann Sebastian Bach, but he also was a teacher of New Testament, and he kept reading the Bible, and finally he thought, I think Jesus wants us to do this stuff. So he gave up being an organist, and he moved to Africa and trained to be a doctor, and we know him as Albert Schweitzer. Where did the help for sick children in Africa come? It came off an organ bench in Paris and Strasbourg. No one saw that coming. When I was growing up, I didn't think about God very much at all. It just wasn't on the radar screen. What I didn't know at the time is that there was a little boy in England whose name was Clive, and his mother died when he was 10. He went off and fought in World War I and was injured. And after that, he said, I'm an atheist. I'll always be an atheist, and everybody else in the world should be an atheist. But then something happened, and he became a profound believer in Jesus. And he wrote a book called Mere Christianity. And when I was in college, somebody handed me a copy of that book, and I read it, and I thought, maybe there really is a God. And I got interested, and it's one of the reasons that I'm here. Who knew? An injured atheist would be the salvation. When you came in this morning at our beginning of the service, we sang, Holy, Holy, Holy. You might like that hymn. It means a lot to me. When I first met Jimmy Jones, we sat here in the sanctuary, and he asked me, what's my favorite hymn? That's a hard pick. There's so many. But I told him, Holy, Holy, Holy. The reason for this is it's the hymn I remember from my childhood. And why do I remember that hymn from childhood? My grandparents would take me to church. It might be the only hymn that plunky pianist knew how to play, or maybe it was the words. I could remember them, right? Because the words are holy, 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 holy. I could sing along. Holy. I remember that song as a child, and then we come in and sing it today, and I get this sense that out of nowhere, God has been with me all of that time, bringing me to this moment. God working unseen. The story from Exodus that Andy has read to us. Ramses was the greatest of all the Egyptian pharaohs, but the Bible is never interested in these big tectonic upheavals in history. The Bible's focus always zooms in on just one child, and that's how it should be in the world when we're making policy in places like Syria or Gaza or the Ukraine or wherever on God's good earth. If we would think about just one child, it would alter what we're about. Think of just one child in Gaza. Think of just one child in the Ukraine. Think of just one child in Ferguson, Missouri. And if we would think about that one child, we would say, this should not be for this one child. The Bible zooms in on this one child. It's a boy, and the boys didn't have much chance of making that in those days because the Pharaoh was threatened by the idea of boys from Israel growing up. So he told the two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Those are great names, aren't they? Some of you are pregnant out there. You should consider these. If I baptized your child, Shiphrah. Shiphrah means little flower. Puah means pretty. Those sound like delicate, feminine people, but Shiphrah and Puah were not. No, they were civil disobedience. They mocked Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh told them to kill all the boys, and they refused to do it. And when the Pharaoh quizzed them about this, you know what they said? A snarky reply. They said, well, the Egyptian women really struggle in childbirth, so we have to help them. But the Hebrew women are so hardy, they deliver the babies before we even show up. Like they're lying through their teeth to the Pharaoh. It's so cool. And God uses them so that this one child, it's just one child. And it says that Moses' mother hid him for 3 months. How in the world do you do that? It's funny. She hid him for 3 months. And then she could hide him no longer. So in desperation, what did she do? She put her little infant son, 3 months old, in a basket. She just floated him down the river. And what's cool is that Hebrew word translated basket is teva. And the word teva only occurs one other time in the Bible, and that is to describe Noah's ark. What does Noah's ark and this little basket have in common? It is that they are ships that do not have a rudder. They do not have a sail. They float just wherever. Or maybe we should say, those two ships float where God wants them to go. God wanted that basket to go where it went. And Moses was found, and he grew up, and he became the salvation of the people of Israel. No one saw it coming. They thought their grinding slavery was a permanent thing. God always works this way. It happened in the time of the New Testament. Caesar Augustus was the greatest of the Roman emperors. Herod was king in Judea. There were crushing political policies, but again, the Bible zooms in on just one child, the baby Jesus. No one saw it coming in that no place called Bethlehem, but he was the one that God raised up to save his people. No one saw it coming. God was working. Why do I tell you all of these things? Because I believe some things, and I hope you will believe them with me, even though they seem impossible and ridiculous. I believe, for instance, that in Gaza, God is raising up somebody that will bring peace in the Middle East. Someone said to me the other day, they've been fighting for decades, they will be fighting forever, but I do not believe that because I believe in a good God, and I believe in the God of peace. So I believe that somewhere, some nameless person is being raised up by God, and there will be peace. Thanks be to God. There are diseases that we cannot cure. There's HIV or Alzheimer's. And it just seems intractable and hopeless. But I believe somewhere, and it may be too late for my dad's wife, who doesn't know him or anybody else, but surely someday, God's going to raise up somebody to learn how to cure Alzheimer's. What a great gift that will be. And it's why we do things in our church like Freedom School. We do Freedom School, and I know what you think. You think, oh, that's so nice that we have children reading in the summertime. It's not nice. We have to dream about and believe in the fact that maybe one of those children in Freedom School, because of what happened, will grow up and will be the one to cure HIV or Alzheimer's. We bless backpacks today. And you've been watching the news of what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri, and the racial situation just seems so complicated and it's just so impossible. But what we've got to believe and dream of is that one of those backpacks will be hoisted on the back of some child who will grow up and will figure out how to bring racial reconciliation to this country. Some of you this week have sent children off to college, and there is a knee-buckling emotion in that. I understand it well. But what if I said to you that one of those children will become the next great political leader in the United States of America? And you might snicker, because you've become as cynical as everybody else, and the devil loves our cynicism that snickers over the possibility. But I believe in God, and God is not unable to raise up someone to be the next great leader in our country. Sometimes people worry about the future of the church. I'm going to tell you about somebody. I didn't ask his permission to talk about him today, but he's talked about me before without permission, so it's only fair. We worry about the future of the church. We say, oh, the church is declining, and the church is struggling, another generation is going to be awful. We're just not sure about the future of the church. I believe in the future of God's church because I've seen some amazing things happen. Here's one. I want to tell you about my dear friend Shane Page. Some of you remember Shane Page. He worked with us here for a number of years. White hot, brilliant preacher. But I tell you, if you rewind about 30 years, I wouldn't give you a nickel for Shane Page. When he was growing up, I don't know if you know his story, his father abandoned his family when he was an infant. So he grew up, didn't have a lot of support. So when he finished high school, he didn't think about going to college. He had a job being a cook at Chili's, and he just kept being a cook at Chili's. There's nothing in that, right? Nobody said go to school. So he's cooking at Chili's. But then he started going to this Methodist church. And it's a church like ours where people go to college. So he had to be an oddball showing up like a cook at Chili's, never went to college. But the people there were good to him. They loved him. They invited him to Bible studies. So he kept thinking and praying. And finally he thought God was telling him to go to community college. So he went to community college. And after that, I don't know if God told him this, but he went to Carolina. But then God did tell him to go to Duke Divinity School because he was hearing a call to be a minister. I mean, I wouldn't have given you a nickel for Shane way back. Who would have thought? But he's come along, and now he's gone to the Harrison Church that really struggled for a long time, and they are on fire out there. Who'd have thought it was a cook at Chili's that would have been the one to come and to save that church? See, God always works in surprising ways. It's why we do what we do here. And this is the time of year I'm supposed to remind you that, oh, we're behind on the budget. Give us money. That sounds so droll. Like, oh, give money, James. And that. Yeah, don't give money because you think we got to meet the budget. Give us money because we need to be in operation here, because this is the laboratory where God raises up people to be the cure. This is the incubation place where God raises up great leaders to do the things of God in this world. We nag you to be in a small group, like take disciple Bible study. Don't think for a minute that, oh, that's a nice thing to do. If you think it's a nice thing to do, please don't sign up. But if you want to change the world and transform your life, sign up for disciple. Because that's the place where God speaks to us and says, here's something cool that I want you to do. It transforms the world and it changes somebody's life. Questions that I'd ask you in closing are these. What is the biggest, seemingly insurmountable challenge that you have? Could it be that right now, even though you see no hope, God is raising up somebody that you don't even know and they don't even know you either. But God might be raising up somebody who will be the help that you need. God's a good God. God can do this. Question that I'd ask is, what is God raising you up to do? I love it when we sing Kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, Kumbaya. Someone's praying out there and they don't know where the answer to their prayer is going to come from, and I suspect that it might just be you. You might be the answer to someone's prayer and you don't even know the person or what's wrong with them yet, but if we're attentive to God, God can raise us up. What is God calling our church to do? We do amazing things, but I suspect God is on the verge of calling us to do something that we haven't thought of yet, that we haven't heard of yet, and it's going to be the greatest thing, and it's going to really matter, and it's going to change the world. Because, see, we believe in a God who finds people on loading docks and in the rubble of an earthquake, convalescing after being injured for battle. God uses atheists. God uses cooks at Chili's. God uses you and me and all of us. That's how great God is. Thanks be to our God.